Hello everyone, welcome to TRT World Forum Digital Debate Series, Designing the Future of Planet Earth Towards the Green Transition, which includes a series of events on the pressing issues of the energy and climate issues. Today, we will have the fifth session of the series on a very timely and relevant topic that is setting the global agenda nowadays. Russia's attack on and its implications on the European energy security. My name is Sahin. I'm a researcher at TRT World Forum, and joining me today, Katja Yafimava here. Dr. Yafimava is a senior research fellow at Oxford Institute for Energy Studies, and her main research areas include EU pipeline gas and LNG regulation, regulation of decarbonization, and transit security of Russian gas exports to Europe. Welcome, Dr. Yafimava. Olga Khakova is here. Ms. Khakova is the Deputy Director for Flagship Convenings and Global Engagement at Global Energy Center of Atlantic Council, where she manages transatlantic energy initiatives. Welcome, Ms. Khakova. And Sohbet Karbuz. Dr. Karbuz works at Mediterranean Observatory for Energy as the director of Hydrocarbons and Energy Security Division. His main areas of interest are oil and natural gas market, energy geopolitics, and energy security. Welcome all again. Let me give you a brief introduction to the session. Recently, discussions around Europe's long-standing energy dependence on Russia have heated up in parallel with Russia's attack on Ukraine. Europe imports around 1/3 of its natural gas and more than 1/4 of its oil from Russia. In turn, European countries are Russia's main energy customer, which drives up to 45% of its federal revenue from fossil fuel exports. The current situation levels up the complexity of this interdependence, and the potential for a total gas cutoff from Russia to Europe cannot be discounted. This would not only have significant impacts on European energy supplies at a time where Europe is suffering the consequences of soaring energy prices and decreasing storage levels. But it would also raise all sorts of questions about the future of European energy security. In this session, European energy security will be discussed in the context of Russia's attack on Ukraine. Dr. Yafimava, I want to open up with you. Some analysts contend that Russia would have little interest in a total gas cutoff, since this would deprive it of revenue and give Europe a further incentive to find other sources of energy. Yet Putin recently stated that the EU and US sanctions will be retaliated. What would be Russia's possible retaliatory moves in terms of energy? You are muted.
Hi. I think I agree with the assessment of the first group of experts. You mentioned that there is no incentive, there is no interest on part of Russia to cut gas supplies to Europe. And, if you look at the whole record from when the then Soviet and then Russian gas went to Europe, there wasn't really, an event except the 2009 gas transit crisis in Ukraine, when gas supplies to Europe were interrupted. So pretty much it's decades and decades long impeccable record of supplies to Europe, which was kept through, throughout the breakup of the USSR. It was fine during the Cold War, through the breakup of the USSR, through the post-Soviet period, and the 2009 transit, with the Russian-Ukrainian gas transit, when there was interruption of those to Europe for 3 weeks, and was major security event back at the day. My interpretation of it, and I've done a lot of research on it, a lot of publications on that. My understanding is and remains that that was a commercial dispute which went very, very wrong. It wasn't a use of the gas weapon, and there was very strong opinion, pretty much in political, in foreign policy, and security communities, that it was the use of the gas weapon. The predominant view in the gas industry, in the legal profession, was that it was a commercial dispute which went wrong for all sorts of complex reasons, intertwined reasons. And once it was sorted, again, there's impeccable record, and is important. It's very important in the gas trade business, particularly in gas pipeline business. Reputation is very important, and Gazprom has been very, very careful about its reputation. So to me, if I'd be hugely surprised if there were to be a cutoff of gas supplies to Europe initiated by Russia. It's not in its interest. If you look at the European side, as you've mentioned at the opening, that Europe, about 1/3 of European consumption comes from Russia. So it's a huge amount, and if you suddenly lose all of it, that's a tremendous loss. You can't compensate it from any sources. You can draw a bit of gas from storages. You can get a bit more LNG, but the sheer volume of it, the sheer scale of it, makes it just impossible. It's just devastating consequences if that were to happen. So neither side, having any interest in doing so, and few reasons when gas supplies could be interrupted. One is, I believe, if Russian banks which handle transactions for gas payments were to be cut off from SWIFT. It has not happened so far. I think those banks were exempted for the time being, and so that's one of the. Second reason would be if there were to be any physical damage on the Ukrainian infrastructure, on the Ukrainian transit lines, for whatever reason, that also could be a possibility for interruption. And again, the nature of that interruption would depend on the scale of the damage and how quickly or slowly it would be possible to fix it. But because we're in such situation of military conflict and the sheer scale of it, just all bets are off on that. What could be physical damage, but I would expect that would be the last possible, least likely option that would happen on purpose, intentionally. Either Europe cutting effectively itself off from Russian gas by imposing, by de-swifting the banks, or Russia cutting it all off from its side to Europe. That's least likely scenario,
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Khakova. Actually, I have a similar question for you, but I'm really curious about your opinion as well. Concerns about an energy disruption from fighting or by intent have been putting pressure on consumers and energy-intensive businesses in Europe. Even before the attack, Russian gas flows through Ukraine had dropped as Gazprom kept the volumes low by historical standards. Since Friday, the flow of gas from Russia to Ukraine has returned to the full amount agreed under long-term contracts at around 110 million cubic meters per day, according to Financial Times. Shall we expect the gas transferred through Ukraine to remain intact, or is it possible to see a Russian intervention as a retaliatory move against Ukraine itself or the EU?
I think it's impossible right now to guess what exactly will happen with Russian gas transit in the middle of Russia pledging full-out war against Ukraine. I think it's impossible to guess and to know for sure. Putin is not necessarily acting in the best interests of his people or the economy. So not being able to calculate that in makes it challenging. Dr. Yafimava, you're right. Russia has been really good about following up on committing to its long-term contracts. But in terms of any of the spot markets commitments, in terms of its storage in Europe, has been historically low. And if you look at Gazprom's Twitter right now, they have been mocking Europe's low storage levels. I mean, that is not how a reliable professional business conducts itself. You are already seeing a huge pullout of big oil and gas majors out of the Russian oil and gas industry. BP, Exxon, Shell, just pulled out of Blue Stream, and Total Energies and others are being pressured to pull out. So there is a huge change happening in the industry. But in terms of Ukraine's transit, I think the best case scenario, what we would love to be able to see now with Nord Stream 2 going bankrupt, that Russia will absolutely need Ukrainian transit system beyond 2024, where that current contract stands right now. That was negotiated several years back. Also a very contentious time going back and forth on how long that contract would be, how many BCMs how low can they go in terms of BCMs. I think in the best case scenario, Russia will continue sending gas through the system while retrieving its forces from Ukraine, while committing to peace, while Ukraine and Europe try to find a way to decarbonize, derussify their energy mix, their gas mix as soon as possible. Now, there's certain things that you can and can't do short-term, medium-term, long-term. I think the diversification of the gas mix would require both more efficiencies, being smarter about how Europe uses energy, thinking about what's possible in terms of rerouting certain LNG and maximizing certain production in some areas. In some countries, that is possible. In some, it's absolutely not because they're already maxed out. And it's also, looking into fuel switching, into cleaner renewable energy. And I think efficiency is just one of those things that hasn't been paid enough attention to, because you can cut tremendous amount of, talking about industries, talking about household heating, you can cut tremendous amount of demand from that. So it's impossible to tell for sure what will happen to Ukrainian transit. In the past, the rhetoric was, as long as Ukraine had these pipelines, that Russia would avoid any kind of aggressive war conflict because they need Ukraine to transition this gas. All of the assumptions are out the window right now. Who knows what the shape of these pipelines will be following this conflict and what Russia has been doing in Ukraine for the last week. But I think the international community can come together in terms of supporting Ukraine, supporting Ukraine's future as a clean energy producer, as a reliable gas / storage country. And I think we all can work together towards that vision.
Thank you, Ms. Khakova. My next question is to Dr. Karbuz. While we are speaking about the transits from Ukraine, I want to ask you about a question about Nord Stream 2. Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz on last Tuesday halted the certification of Nord Stream 2, the new $11 billion gas pipeline linking Russia and Germany, and by ignoring Ukraine, let's say. Some criticize this decision for rendering the project useless as a future political leverage against Russia. What is your take on Germany's decision to halt the certification as a retaliation? Was it too early, as the critics argue?
Well, it depends whom you ask, I think, this question. But Nord Stream 2 started with problems and ended with problems. Well, we don't know. Actually, we heard in some news channels that it filed the bankruptcy, but in others, it is not really filed the bankruptcy, but just laid off all the people. Germans wanted to have direct access to Russian gas, and Russia wanted to avoid transit through Ukraine and Poland. And for that, they constructed Nord Stream 1 and Turk Stream. But with the pressure now developing, there were some delays. through the route, there's permission procedures, and then that European Commission was pushing that it does not apply the European rules, and that is why just a few weeks ago Nord Stream established another company to take over this transmission issue. Then people have changed in this new company. Then the frictions started, and the German regulator postponed the decision. And then the latest postponement was for the mid this year. And then we have this war. And then basically it is out of picture, it seems. But what might come or what might follow, what will happen with Nord Stream 1? Will that be cut off too or not? That would be more interesting, because already no gas was flowing anyway from Nord Stream 2. So in terms of physical lack of molecules in European gas supply, we haven't seen it. So it didn't have any impact. It was for the future. It was just reshuffling the molecules through the routes. But if something happens for Nord Stream 1, because we don't have any intergovernmental agreements for that pipeline for Nord Stream 1. So who knows what the future will be if Nord Stream 1 is out of picture and Germany, without having any LNG terminal or FSRU for that sake, things will get complicated. So we don't know, because as you mentioned at the beginning, things change very fast. We will see. But it will have big implications. Do you hear me? I cannot hear anything.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
I think I had a problem with my connection. Sorry for that. You can hear me right now, right? Okay. Did you finish your question? I couldn't catch this part.
Yes. That is enough. I don't want to take too much time. Yeah.
Okay. Speaking of the diversification strategies of the EU, Ms. Khakova, in case of in recent years, Europe increased LNG trade to reduce the dependence on Russia, and by the end of the year, American energy firms ramped up the LNG export capacity by almost 20%, which accounts for 26% of all LNG imported by Europe. However, according to the International Energy Agency, the new supply may not be enough to bail out Europe if Russia turns off the gas flow because of the lack of free short-term capacity among LNG exporters in the US. Could you explain the role of LNG in Europe's energy security in the short term? What should we expect from the transatlantic energy cooperation following the Russia-Ukraine war?
Yeah, I think it's incredible how this conflict has brought the US and its European allies together, quite the opposite of what was intended by the Kremlin, actually, and how quickly the allies stepped up and producers in the United States stepped up to support Europe in the best way possible. Yes, absolutely. The long-term contracts are a challenge right now. They are diverting some of the supplies from Europe. I think this begs a question on any new contracts coming in and the conversation of the balance of spot market versus long-term. In the last 10, 15 years, Europe has really pushed to reduce the amount of long-term contracts, to make it a more of a competitive market, to drive down the price. And in many ways, it has succeeded, and it allowed for some really great negotiations and for new LNG terminals to come online and capture some of that capacity. I think going into the future, there's arguments going in. We need to go back to fully all long-term contracts to make sure that that capacity is there, that you can rely on it. I think what will likely end up happening is maybe there will be a balance where necessarily we don't fully move to all long-term contracts, but perhaps the EU and the Commission, perhaps there's value in discussing what is that percentage threshold for the future where we feel comfortable in having, okay, maybe 20 to 30%, maybe 40%, whatever that percentage is, of our imports should be long-term contracts, and they should go into the 10, 15, 20 years, maybe more, maybe less, while also thinking about how carbon pricing will be integrated into these contracts as well. And I think you can ignore that going into the future and what needs to happen the next 10 until 2050 to reach that net zero. So I think that's a conversation that's happening right now. I think also really utilizing storage and maximizing storage, having a more unified strategy. I mean, some countries in the EU have strategies for strategic reserves where they they make sure to have a certain amount, but it is not cohesive right now. There isn't really a minimum amount that the countries are required to buy. And I think EU and it's hard when the prices are so high to tell countries, to tell its member states, go in and fill up your storage at this record price. That is a challenging thing to ask in this environment. But I think that's where also the EU and the Commission can come in and maybe provide some funding, some support to say, look, at this time in the year, this is springtime, and we're going into the summer, this is where we start really ramping up that storage capacity and really maximizing it, maybe building out some more. That way, that's another tool that we can use, and never going below a certain amount. For example, going into September, having really clear guidance on that our storage will be at this level, September, October. And that way you could at least have that chunk of capacity that you can rely on. But LNG will continue to play an important role, even in a really robust decarbonized environment, because you still have quite a bit of coal capacity that is being phased out in Europe. You still have a lot of nuclear capacity that's being phased out. And I do think that's a missed opportunity. Germany, Belgium, I think this is the worst time to be doing this. I think Europe, all of the countries need to come together and figure out how to extend these nuclear reactors for as long as possible. And then while also supporting the long-term plan of building out new nuclear reactors. So all of these strategies are going to come cohesively together, but LNG will continue to play an important role. And I think as we think about which suppliers can ramp up their production, as we think about optimizing the existing LNG terminals and capacity, I think we also need to think about how to decarbonize this gas in the next several years. Right now, what options are out there in terms of carbon capture? Some companies are looking into offsets, and that's a whole different conversations on how impactful they actually are. But I think that needs to be happening in parallel, and I think there is no reason why it shouldn't. I don't think that one hurts the other. And I think we can both ramp up our support of LNG exports and pursue decarbonization at the same time successfully.
Thank you, Ms. Khakova. Well, I think we can all say that the situation is pretty complicated, and time will show how it will go about for the European energy security. And I have a similar question for you again, Dr. Yafimava, because I'm curious. I'm wondering your opinion in this issue again. Can LNG imports play a key role in reducing the dependence on Russia? Because the US and the EU are working on contingency plans to get LNG by ship from the US, Qatar, Algeria, and elsewhere. To what extent is this strategy feasible? You are muted.
Yes. Well, after 2009 gas transit crisis, that's as early actually. It's 10 years now. 10 years ago that the EU adopted its new energy security strategy, energy union strategy, security of supply regulation, etc., all of those things. And this package also then included this LNG strategy. So what I'm saying is already 10 years ago, the EU has been trying very hard and achieved a lot to diversify it effectively. You could argue it did all it could. Lots of interconnections and LNG terminals, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe and in Southern Europe as well, got built despite the fact that they didn't have much of a business case, and the EU provided a lot of funding for doing so. So you can argue all what it could, it did, and countries which previously had Russia as the only supplier also got access to other sources, and they've got their LNG terminals, etc. It doesn't change the basic fact, though, that there is as much or as little gas around. It's not so much a matter of capacity, it actually matter how much physical supply globally is there. And Europe is part of global interconnected market. So you have, they're only ultimately, if you're in serious, there are two sources which could significantly, increase supplies to Europe in the near future, and that's Russian gas and that's global LNG. So Russian gas now a lot of people question, and it's already it's significant share. It's 1/3. It's a big share. It's difficult to believe it would go further. But if you look at the LNG, you have fierce competition for it from the Asian markets, because if you look at the situation in the market now and going forward, if Europe are losing any of Russian gas supplies, there's very little flexible LNG available. And if it comes to Europe, it would have to be diverted from other customers, specifically is Asia and mostly from China. And because it would have to be a diversion, that would drive prices up. So that really a competition for LNG. It's obviously a welcome contribution, and in fact, there's been an influx of LNG into Europe in January. And but that's not a complete panacea, because it's needed in all sorts of other places as well. And if you just Europe is not really short also of import capacity, of LNG import terminal capacity. It's a matter of physical availability of gas globally rather than receiving capacity, and that's I think a very important issue. But the key point I'm also trying to make, that whatever one does, because now we hear a lot of conversation and a lot of talk again about reducing dependence. We even hear things like energy independence for Europe, which really is impossible. But we hear all that drive that we've heard after the 2009 transit crisis. But as I said, a lot of opportunities have been used. A lot of has been done in terms of diversification. But going further, going forward, the objective reality is such that you'd need both. You'd need LNG, but you also would still need Russian gas. And that really, the fate of it, and it would really depend on how the Russian-Ukrainian, what we see now in Ukraine, how that is resolved. Because if you look at the Soviet history and post-Soviet history and what we have now, gas trade, pipeline gas trade, pretty much has been the bridge which held throughout, throughout the whole history. And it's the only thing that actually held when everything else pretty much faltered. And I think we're now again at that stage, and it really remains to be seen whether, if you call it sort of the last bridge, whether that survives or whether it will be burned. In my view, it really depends on a broader survival of European-Russian relationship, and how the Ukrainian situation is resolved. If the relationship is patched up in Russia and Ukraine and Europe and Russia, then it's one picture, and then you could see things, if not coming back as they were, but sort of normalizing. If you just see sort of escalatory spiral as we actually see now, then it's very difficult to be positive. But I think that is really the key. Everything else is kind of secondary. But also because Europe depends so much on Russian gas, and that's and Russia depends on revenue, that, hopefully with luck, that might be the bridge that could contribute to actually patching up the relationship and kind of get the sides to negotiate. And one comment I'd like to make on what Sohbet just said about Nord Stream 2, in my view, Nord Stream 2 approval had a significant deterrence value. And the fact that it was, the certification was frozen, and that the United States almost immediately followed with, taking the waiver away and effectively sanctioning Nord Stream 2. And that happened right the day before all this military drama started. In my view, by revoking waiver, by freezing certification, that really reduced dramatically Nord Stream 2 value. That I think that was one of the factors, and really, had it not been done, I think I'm not saying that it would have prevented anything, but it might have been, if you like, the last straw that breaks the camel back. I don't think that was a good decision that was announced on 23rd of February, just diminishing deterrence value.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr. Yafimava. I'm going to continue with this diversification options of the EU. Dr. Karbuz, what role do you see for the South Mediterranean countries and Turkey for improving European gas supply security?
Yeah, well, most of the countries in the South Mediterranean, like this Algeria, Libya, and we call Turkey also South Mediterranean country, are connected by pipelines to Europe. But Europe is relying too much on LNG. I mean, LNG is always put forward. Yes, but one thing is forgotten, I think. Okay, EU has a lot of LNG capacity, which are almost working in full capacity, LNG terminals. But the problem is that look where the LNG terminals are located and where these capacities are. So you see the big chunk of that capacity in Spain. How do you bring the LNG from Spain where it is needed? Where it is needed is Central and Eastern Europe. You cannot, because of some decisions, Spanish and French regulators' decision. There was a MidCat project to increase the interconnection between Spain and France. So they canceled. It was a European PCI project. It was canceled. It was dropped. So what? I mean, you can bring a lot of LNG, but what if you cannot bring it up northern and eastern part of Europe? So I don't think that LNG capacities make too much sense. Okay, you can bring LNG, we discussed, but we should not forget, Russia was the third biggest LNG supplier to Europe last year. 20% of LNG, of European LNG imports came from Russia. So that means if you want to drop that, we are talking a lot of LNG to be diverted if it could be found. So from South Mediterranean, we can bring, I think we can have some additional LNG from Egypt, because most of Egypt's LNG is sold on spot market. But, the companies don't make favors. The companies are there to make profits. So if the spot LNG prices justify, they would send it to Europe. If not, they would find better opportunities, which is normally Asian market. So it will depend. We cannot take it granted that all additional LNG supply that could be diverted or could be bought on spot market would go to Europe. This is a very big assumption. So It will all depend on the prices. And in today's prices, wow, that that would be a lot of money. And we are now exiting the winter period, so we have 6 months left until October. We have to fill this storage, and you like it or not, you have to fill it, the storage, because you will never know how the situation will evolve and how cold the winter will be. Don't forget, in December we had a big problem. So in September we had the big jumps as well. So we have to fill the storage, and that is why now the Commission is talking about even strategic gas storage. Before they were saying that, oh, who cares storage? Just-in-time production system. Whenever you need gas, you just bring it. You don't need to store it. Comes with a cost. And now everything is ignored. We are talking about even the Commission, the Union, supporting and giving funds to fill the storage. So this is very, very important. Algeria, yes, Algeria could increase, because when we look at the historical evolution, Algeria's exports was the highest last year in the past 10 years, since 2011. But from Libya, it was reverse, the lowest in the past 10 years. So from Libya, there is capacity, but look at what is being physically exported. So it will all depend on the situation in Libya. So of course, there is a capacity, there is a big pipeline there, but it will all depend on what is happening in Libya. And what we have heard today in the news, it is not going that well in Libya. In Algeria, okay, there is a ramp up in the production because of some upgrade in some of the facilities. So that is why production increased. But in Algeria, it will also depend on the demand. But let's take it aside. Algerian gas can come, but that would be only sufficient to supply or to fulfill the contractual quantities for Spain. I don't think that any additional supply would go. And that is even a question mark, because last year, the GME pipeline, the contracts was expired and it was not extended. So that pipeline is out of schedule because of the political dispute between Morocco and Algeria. So, okay, pipeline is out of question. Only some additional LNG can come. How much? Okay, let's say 6-7 BCM. 6-7 BCM, maybe another 5-6 BCM from Libya. We have 15 BCM together if you pay the price from Egypt. Then comes Turkey. Turkey, Tana pipeline goes over Turkey to TAP pipeline and brings gas to Europe. So the capacity is there, but last year the shipment was, of course, not fulfilling capacity because it is only 13 months that is in operation. So EU talked to Algeria to increase the capacity. Maybe this year it will work maybe full capacity, but what are we talking about? 3 BCM additional compared to 2021. So there Turkey could maybe play a role. Turkey has a lot of LNG facilities. Saros LNG hopefully will come online this year. If Turkish demand is not as high as last year, maybe even Turkey could divert some of LNG or some pipeline gas, provided that, of course, the suppliers agree, because all have destination clauses. You cannot divert them, but maybe, this could be solved politically. So definitely South Mediterranean countries can contribute, but cannot replace the whole. If whole Russian gas is cut, nothing can help in that way. So we just simply would go to full speed in fifth gear to full global energy crisis. That's it.
Thank you, Dr. Karbuz. It was insightful, and we've been talking about a lot of countries actually, and it is clear that this war will have like more global repercussions. So I want to ask you a question, Dr. Yafimava. Russia is a global energy giant responsible for supplying 17% of the global natural gas consumption, while the world is heading towards net zero in 2050, in line with the Paris Agreement. Shall we expect fundamental shifts in the global energy transition with regards to Russia's attack on Ukraine, which endangered the existing energy security framework? How would this situation affect the energy transition on a global scale, considering that the EU is a leading actor for the global net zero efforts?
Thanks. The question. Yes, indeed, the EU has been the leading actor. It's been very active. It's adopted its European climate law. So these 2050 net zero emissions reduction objectives are all in place. They're in law, basically. And I would expect the EU really to redouble on these efforts. So I think all these drive to decarbonize the European energy system will continue. Of course, it is a very expensive thing to do, and if the situation the globally becomes just so very difficult, because we're kind of just out of COVID era, and if you see what's happening on the markets globally because of these crises that we're having now, then you and then inflationary pressures, and then the question is whether everything goes into recession, and that normally that any recession would make all kind of reforms, let alone such a gigantic task as energy transition, very very expensive and more difficult, and all sorts of things associated with it. Even before energy transition, obviously, was a very challenging task to do. It's becoming even more difficult, but it's not that it's going to be dropped. I think it's going to be continued. But the importance of it is also how it is to achieved. Of course, there are two versions: whether it's electrification, whether it's pure electrification of the entire system, which are hugely expensive, and I'm not an engineer, but engineers say it's not even possible from a technical point of view to electrify everything, or it's going to be hybrid. So you have electrification, but you also have decarbonized gas, featuring very heavily in the balance. So you have steep reduction of, particularly after 2030. In methane usage, in natural gas usage, and you'll see increased use of decarbonized gases instead, including hydrogen and biomethane and the rest of it. And again, when you go into hydrogen, there are two ways of doing it. It's renewable hydrogen produced from renewable electricity, and then the question is how fast you can decarbonize the European grid to produce that decarbonize that renewable hydrogen. And that's a massive challenge, and it takes time and also hugely expensive. And the second way is also decarbonized methane. So methane with carbon capture and storage. And some countries in Europe opt for this. Some countries in Europe opt for renewable hydrogen for various reasons. But then the question is what the perceived availability and price for gas might do to prospects of low carbon hydrogen, meaning the hydrogen produced from natural gas. So that's also an open question. But the short answer would be I'd expect I'd expect transition to continue. It's just going to become more challenging because already now you have a huge volatility in prices. If Europe manages to put sort of reasonable legal regulatory framework for the next 10 years for the period when gas demand Europe still would have to import increasing amounts of gas because its local production is declining fast. If it manages to put in place that framework to have reasonable relationship with all gas suppliers, of course, it gives it a lot more comfortable environment to accomplish the transition. If it's going to have sort of an energy crisis and high price environment every year for at least until this new wave of LNG comes in, which sort of mid 2020s probably, then it just becomes a lot more difficult. And again, it comes all back to politics. You have to have a reasonable political relationship with all of your suppliers, and if you don't have it with Russia, then the whole structure really sort of crumbles because you can't replace that much in such short term. And efforts have been made. It's not fair to say that Europe hasn't made any effort to diversify. It's done a lot for the last decade. It sort of pretty much hit the limit.
Thank you, Katya. The green transition actually is a really important part of EU's energy policies at large. So I'll continue with this. Ms. Khakova, the European Green Deal aims at net zero in 2015, and natural gas is still seen as a crucial transition fuel. However, already suffering from the recent energy crunch with high prices, some analysis argue that Europe has already lost the hopes for a summer decline in gas prices. According to IHS market analysis, the war between Russia and Ukraine will contribute to inflation and create political stresses as high prices pass through to customers, which would curb the energy transition processes in Europe. How would you interpret the future of natural gas in the context of European green transition?
Yeah, I still think natural gas has an extremely important role to play in European energy transition. And I think right now we can't look at it in a vacuum with the war in Ukraine, with the need to decarbonize hard security, energy security, and decarbonization. We have to think of it as a comprehensive kind of mechanism vehicle to get us where we want to be, where Europe can minimize its reliance on Russian imports while also decarbonizing as much as possible. It's not following this conflict. This is not something that Russia can recover from like they did from 2006 and 2009. This is different. They will never recover from this. So this will really energize Europe, and it already has energized Europe and the United States to work together and urgently find ways to decarbonize, urgently invest in renewable energy, and try to find and address the barriers in terms of investing in these projects, technology exchanges. So yes, natural gas will play an important role, but there are significant things that we can do together as allies, as partners now to improve efficiency all across the board. And I'm not just talking about in buildings. That's huge. That's something that could be done really quickly, relatively quickly compared to the larger, 10, 20-year strategies. But I think efficiencies across even pipelines, minimizing how much is leaking. We talked about methane emission regulations. And then on the back end of how energy is being used, yes, electrification of what's possible to electrify, what's economical to electrify. That's sometimes a pre-step to decarbonization. Like, for example, from gas heating to electric heat pumps. That's a prerequisite to be more efficient, be smarter in terms of how the energy is used. I think coupling the strong LNG strategy where you're minimizing how much is coming from Russia with a strategy to continue investing in extending the life of nuclear reactors, kind of having this comprehensive strategy around LNG in the role of decarbonization, and of course coupling it with creative and new technologies of ways to decarbonizing it. So that carbon capture, is of course will play an escalating important role, and that's what will allow natural gas and LNG to continue playing this key role. Like I said, offsets is something else that companies are looking at right now. There's a lot of debate whether how impactful they are and what needs to be done to make them more impactful and actually bring down these initiatives. But I think regardless, the question is not how soon, not whether Europe will diversify its gas dependence, but how quickly, because that is going to happen following the war in Ukraine, and it's just a matter of time. And we're going to work together. United States and Europe are poised to work together on making that happen.
Thank you, Ms. Khakova. Keeping up with the green transition efforts, Dr. Karbuz, some analysts contend that in recent years, the EU's priority shifted from energy security to climate change, leading up to the EU's Green Deal. Yet this crisis displayed a great comeback of energy security as an issue in Europe. Accordingly, Bloomberg reported that European imports of Russian gas through Ukraine jumped by nearly 40% on Thursday, the day the attack began. How would you explain this phenomenon?
Well, there are two different questions here. Let's start with this transition and the Green Deal. Well, as we all know, for more than 30 years, energy security was one of the pillars of the EU energy policy. With the European Commission's 2030 Climate and Energy Policy Framework, which was published in 2014, this situation has started to change. Then we moved, or the policy tilted towards climate change. Then Paris Agreement came, then 2019 Green Deal, then hydrogen strategy, etc. Basically, climate change became number one priority. So now we have a war situation. Okay, climate change is number one priority. Decarbonize everything, get rid of all fossil fuels as much as possible. Hydrogen economy or electrified economy. But look, we have in September, in October, we have seen when wind doesn't blow, sun doesn't shine, we need a base load. And well, we had problems. Where is this base load? Coal power plants are shutting down, nuclear power plants are shutting down. So what is left? Gas, of course, but everyone may need gas. So other speakers mentioned we had several disruptions of Russian gas to Europe, 2006, 2008, then the important 2009, etc. So they were, in fact, wake-up calls for EU, but nobody was home. And last year, the energy security, gas supply security, knocked the door, but still, renewables. If we had renewables, too much renewables, we wouldn't have this problem. This nonsense, I'm sorry, I don't take it. In the future, long term, maybe. Renewables need backup, and that backup, the best backup is natural gas. So, to my view, current situation, in fact, reveals the failure of the current EU energy policy, at least in the midterm. You cannot achieve everything in 10 years. It is impossible. And we are seeing it. If you try hard, well, it will come with big costs and with crisis. In the very long term, we are talking about hydrogen economy. We've been talking about hydrogen economy in the past 70 years. So, okay, hydrogen will be the energy carrier of the future, like 70 years ago. Yes, in the long term, there is bright side, but until then, we need natural gas. And for that, hopefully now European Commission puts all the facts together and prepares a better energy security policy and put supply security in front on the agenda, on the top parts. I think this will be a short answer.
Well, actually, every question has really long answers, but yeah, we're almost out of time. So I just have a couple of more questions. This question will be for Ms. Khakova. As we were talking about, the natural gas will keep being a reality in European energy security, and nowadays we are talking about the soaring prices. Since day one, fears that war could disrupt global energy supplies increased the European gas prices temporarily by almost 70%, while crude oil rose above $105 a barrel for the first time since 2014. The European gas price has risen from 16 euros a year ago. Shall we expect a continuous upward trend in European energy prices? What would be the potential measures to be taken from the European side?
Yeah, so there are several factors to consider. It's hard to predict exactly about how much higher the prices will go, but a lot of the analysis, congregated analysis out there, predicts that for the next several years, these high prices are not going away. Now, they might drop slightly depending on what happens with the war that Russia waged against Ukraine and with other geopolitical contexts. It will depend on how quickly some of this additional capacity, some of the additional suppliers will be able to get some of their exports pumping out, like what happens in the United States, if the regulatory environment will be supportive of additional LNG exports, even in Canada that has really still high potential for these exports. And of course, we talked about other potential suppliers. So I think this is obviously something that the whole world is paying attention to, because this cost eats away at everyone's wallet. This cost eats away at also the overall European budget, where they could be spending this money towards energy transition, and instead, this money is going to support, rightfully so, a lot of these households being able to pay their energy bills. But I do think, in terms of kind of what to watch in the next couple of months, is what happens with the conflict, because while this conflict continues, as we discussed earlier today, countries in Europe are going to be looking to refill their storage, and it's not too early to start thinking about that. So you have that going on while there's still supply shortage, while there's still all of the supplies being tied in the long-term contract, while the conflict is happening in Ukraine. So it's a tough situation, and it really requires a global collaboration and really transatlantic cooperation on this to figure out how to minimize the damage from the high prices.
Thank you, Ms. Khakova. Speaking of this versus between energy security concerns and transition, like green transition, Dr. Yafimava, I have a question for you regarding this Europe's efforts to turn to renewable energies. The Russia-Ukraine crisis implies that Europe would need to speed up these investments in self-reliant and renewable energy projects. What kind of regulatory and infrastructural moves can we expect from the European side? Do you think that Russia's move would result in self-harm, causing its customers to find alternative solutions to energy needs?
Right. anything that could be done to to bring about energy transition, etc., those are long-term prospects. Those are whatever Europe does now, there won't be on the ground result until at least 2030 and beyond. So, and we're talking about the decade, how Europe gets with less pain up to 2030 and beyond. So it's very kind of nice and easy to talk about what's going to be past 2030, but it's like if you're flying a plane and is in turbulence zone, you kind of think about how you're going to have a nice cup of tea when you land, but you're not really sure whether you land if it's really bad turbulence, really. So that's the thing, you really have to address things as they are. And now it's a really extreme crisis situation. That's obviously the energy crisis, and now it's really high pitch security crisis in the heart of Europe. And and parties to that crisis are also nuclear states. And things just go sort of, you kind of read the news and things just escalate so fast. So Ukraine is sort of under siege by Russia. Well, it's Russia militarily, and Russia is now under siege by economically by the EU and the US. If you read all the sanctions packages, so they're pretty draconian measures. And if you ask me, that really leads nowhere, or it really kind of leads down escalatory spiral. And as the saying goes, the road to hell is very fast. So, got to stop, got to kind of think about how to get out of it, how to renegotiate, how to patch up the situation with minimal human cost and all of that. So that's key. And if that is sort of sorted, then one can talk about all other issues. But I just don't think that Russia can be cut out energy-wise, cut out from the global economy, and then the rest of the world just proceeds as normal, happily. I don't think that's a realistic scenario. So I think everyone should step from the brink and kind of think again. And that's just security and energy and pretty much all of it. It's very much connected. And obviously energy transition. So you just have to do first things first.
Thank you, Dr. Yafimava. We are almost out of time, but I just want to touch upon one more topic that I'm personally wondering, actually, and I'll ask this to Dr. Karbuz. It's about the swift decision of the European countries that they're agreed on these sanctions against Russia, including like cutting it off from the international payment system, the SWIFT. How would this decision affect European energy security, considering its fundamental impact on the finance and feasibility of energy trade?
Well, in fact, the restrictions to access the SWIFT was not meant to cover the energy trade, but SWIFT and the blockage of some banks, and lastly, the Russian central bank, etc. The people don't know what to do. It created a lot of risks, confusions, and uncertainties. So that has impact what we have seen today. It was in the news again that some Ural shipments don't find tankers. The people don't know how they will be paid, etc. And this will have an indirect impact also in investments. If the companies do not feel comfortable with these payment issues, etc., so they will be very, very uncomfortable. So we don't know where it will go ahead, but this is a very strong tool or very strong weapon, let's say, to cut off Russia's access to oil and gas revenues, but in an indirect way by creating conditions. Who knows? We are seeing, on the other hand, it was mentioned before, some companies already giving up their assets in Russia, and some declared that they will not go ahead with their investment plans. So if SWIFT completely out of picture, and if there is another restriction comes on Gazprom Bank, already this is declaring a kind of unofficial embargo to oil and gas imports from Russia. And basically, everyone, especially the people in middle and low income countries, they will suffer. There is because of the huge impact on prices. So we don't know where it will go. For the moment, okay, they say energy trade is not impacted, but on the ground, we see that this confusion has indirectly impacting the deals, investments, and trade. In fact.
Thank you, Dr. Karbuz. Thank you, everyone. I learned a lot of information. It was really insightful. I hope our audience also enjoyed this session. So this is the end of this session. Thank you for coming. I hope we can see you again in our future events. Yeah, that's all.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.